Following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared in the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
So it is Saturday, and we have the answer about money. The radio show is the answer, or the radio station is the answer, and we are talking about money. So were you watching the Michael Cohen testimony before Congress? You know, we've known that there's a possibility that there was going to be an impeachment of President Trump. I think the probability went up some. I think there's some probability he could be removed from office. Who knows? Whether you were a supporter or opposed to Trump, you have to consider the impact of what that is, the impact of impeachment and more on the markets. The idea, I was an Eagle Scout, and the Eagle Scouts say, be prepared. And that's what I want you, the listener, to be. Be prepared. Be prepared for the worst and hope for the best. You know, it's not just Michael Cohen. The Mueller report is coming to a close. The Southern District of New York is looking at a number of problems or investigations. The state of New York is doing a number of investigations. So there's a whole lot of questions. And my concern in this program is not whether there's an investigation, not whether there's an indictment, not whether there's an impeachment, but what is the impact of that possibility on the market. You know, I was at a National Association of Pension Advisors conference where they gathered the top pension advisors together, and there was a lobbyist and a congressional political advisor there, and everyone in the room was asking questions about the Department of Labor, about the fiduciary standard, about taxes, about returns, about infrastructure. And I was the only one who sat there and thought, what happens if Trump is impeached? So I asked the question, because it really is not a remote possibility. I think with the Democrats controlling the House of Representatives, it is or could be a possibility. And the response was that during the Clinton impeachment, everything in Washington, D.C. ground to a halt. That gives you some idea of what goes on. You know, I've been saying on this program for over 10 years that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. There's lessons to be learned. And it may not happen in the same ways. It may not happen at all in the same ways. But the best information we have is what's happened in the past. And if you listen to some of the various pundits that are now talking about what could go on, I'm really surprised and shocked at some of the things they say. You have the doom and gloomers that talk about the sky is falling and that the economy is going to crash if Trump is impeached. And, you know, those are opinions. They're not supported by data, and they're not supported by history. You know, they could be right. Look back in history, and there were people who did extraordinary predictions. Nikola Tesla predicted Wi-Fi and smartphones, and he did that in 1909. Nostradamus predicted the Great Fire in London in 1666. Robert Boyle predicted in the 1600s that we would be doing organ transplants at some time in the future. Those predictions came true, but there's very, very few of those predictions not based on real data that have come true. So keep the predictions in mind. It's best to keep them in mind and watch what happens. But it's best to look at history and the data. And it's going to be important to be in the right place. The economy is going very strong, and my opinion is that impeachment is really not going to change that. I'm going to talk more about that later in the program. But there will be some impact on certain industries. And if you've been around very long, you've lived through Watergate as well. And there are a lot of similarities. It was 2 years into the Nixon presidency, the second term, before it really started to gear up. But once it started, it really accelerated, and a trickle of news was followed by a small stream, followed by a river, followed by a tsunami. And that's what we've been seeing with this whole thing, with the Mueller investigation, with Michael Cohen, and all the things that are going on. So, what is the impact of impeachment? So, looking at history, the first impeachment took place back in 1868. Andrew Johnson had succeeded Abraham Lincoln as president. Lincoln was assassinated. Johnson was elevated to the presidency. Andrew Johnson had been a senator from Tennessee when he was selected by Lincoln to be vice president. And he was the only senator from the South who was loyal to the Union. The rest of the senators had all gone with the Confederate states. And it was a turbulent time. The Civil War had ended. It was brother against brother, family against family. It was a very turbulent time. And it ended with the South in defeat, everybody knows. As president, what Johnson did is that he began a very lenient Reconstruction policy in the South. Almost total amnesty to the ex-Confederate, the Confederate Army, the Confederate suppliers, almost a complete amnesty. There was a rapid restoration of the U.S. state status for the seceded states. He enabled states to legislate what were called the Black Codes, essentially preserving the system of slavery in everything but name. And like now, where you have the Democrats controlling the House, in those days, the Republicans controlled the House, and the Republicans were from the North. So in 1867, before the impeachment happened, the Republican House and Senate passed what was called the Tenure of Office Act, and they passed it over Johnson's veto. It required that before anyone could be removed in the administration, that it had to have Senate approval. It was essentially passed to protect the members of the cabinet, like Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. And Stanton was a leading Republican radical in the Lincoln administration. He continued that into the Johnson administration. As a person, he was bullheaded, he was stubborn, he was controversial because he was brutal in delivering his opinions. He called people stupid, he called people incompetent. He was not what you normally think of as a politician. He was brutal. And he opposed the actions that Johnson was taking with the South, and he was really harsh in his criticism of the president. So the act was passed to protect people like Stanton, and especially Stanton. So the first thing that Johnson tried to do was to test the constitutionality of the Tenure of Office Act, and he appointed Ulysses S. Grant to replace Stanton. And it worked its way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court refused to rule on whether that act was valid or not valid. And so Grant resigned and turned the Secretary of War cabinet post back to Stanton. And so Johnson decided to fire Stanton. And within 3 days, the House of Representatives began an impeachment on 11 counts. Once they completed the impeachment, it went to trial in the Senate. And there were 41 witnesses, 15 for the defense and 26 for the prosecution. And that whole thing went to a vote of the Senate. Now, to remove a president from office after the trial, you have to have 2/3 of the senators voting for removal. In the case of Johnson, it fell 1 vote short of removal from office. So Johnson was able to survive that. So that's the history of what went on during that time. So what happened? There was no Dow at that time, but we do know that the markets prior to the impeachment beginning were up about 10%. That was during the 3 months prior to impeachment. And during the impeachment time, it took a dip. But within 2 months after the impeachment began, it was up 6%, and it continued to be positive. So what we see is an impeachment and a trial in the Senate, and the market takes a little dip when it begins and recovers very easily. Now, that was back in the 1860s. We have two more examples of impeachments that happened. Nixon. I was already born when that began, and I lived through it. I remembered it was curious in the beginning because there wasn't a lot of information. There was a break-in at the Watergate. Woodward and Bernstein were working for the Washington Post, and in June 1972, they started reporting that there was an address book Howard Hunt had, and there was a check that was made out to Charles Colson. It all seemed like a very, very strange thing and not very important. But by September of 1972, Hunt and Liddy and the burglars were indicted. We're going to come back and pick up this story and some of the others. And this runs a little longer than most monologues, but it's really important to understand what happens with the markets, because I believe there's a significant chance that we're going to see impeachment process begin in the House. Whether it ever makes it, and whether it's ever implemented and voted on, whether it ever makes it to the Senate, and whether there's ever a trial, who knows? But I believe that could be coming, so you should be prepared, and that's what the purpose of this is for. Don't go away. We'll pick up Nixon right after the commercial break.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
Okay, so I've been talking about impeachment. I want to pick that up. I want to pick up Richard Nixon. Nixon was running for re-election. There was a break-in to the Democratic National Headquarters in the Watergate complex, and the burglars actually were picked out, and they were indicted, and they would go and plead guilty in January of 1973. Nixon won the election in 1972. The burglars, a couple months later, plead guilty. And in April, John Dean starts cooperating with prosecutors. And in April, Ehrlichman and Haldeman, the two key aides to Nixon, both resign, and John Dean is fired. In May, the Senate actually begins their investigation. Now, if you look back at what's going on today, the Senate and the House have already begun their investigations a year ago. But in this case, they didn't do it until after the burglars were indicted, after Dean actually is fired, and Ehrlichman and Haldeman resign. And as part of that, the Attorney General appoints Archibald Cox as the special prosecutor. And during that investigation in June, John Dean tells the Senate that there's been a cover-up of the break-in, that it stretches all the way into the White House. In his testimony, Alexander Butterfield then reveals that Nixon has tapes. He records all the conversations on tapes. And thus begins a fight over whether those tapes should be allowed to be played and become evidence for the special prosecutor. And of course, by October, there's what's called the Saturday Night Massacre. Nixon, concerned about what's going on in the investigation, orders his Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, to fire Archibald Cox, the special prosecutor appointed to investigate what had gone on. Very similar to Mueller. Richardson refuses and resigns. So Nixon then turns to the Deputy Attorney General, William Ruckelshaus, and asks him to fire Archibald Cox, bring this investigation to an end. It's crazy. It doesn't say it's a witch hunt, but it's similar kind of language. Ruckelshaus refuses to fire Cox, and he resigns. So Nixon turns to Robert Bork, and Bork actually fires Cox. It probably cost Bork a Supreme Court appointment, because when he was nominated for the Supreme Court, this whole incident came up, and Bork was turned down as a Supreme Court justice. But Bork was the one that actually fires the special prosecutor, and there's such a revolt from Congress, there's a revolt from people, that finally Nixon agrees to allow the appointment of a second special prosecutor, Leon Jaworski. And of course, following that, just a few weeks later, Nixon appears on TV with his hands up in the victory sign saying, "I am not a crook." The very famous, "I am not a crook." By March of 74, 6 months later, Nixon is named an unindicted conspirator. And of course, by August, he's convinced to resign. As the investigation rolled and picked up momentum and speed, we see what happens with the market. The market was actually, from 1972 until 1974, when Nixon resigned, the market was in a time of drifting downward, and sometimes not so much drifting downward. You had inflation really picking up during that time. You remember the oil crisis began at that time in 1972. Arthur Burns was appointed chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Burns wanted to push the economy upward. That's what Nixon wanted Burns to do as well, is to really stimulate the economy. So you have inflation going, and you have the economy being pushed with a lot of money flowing in. The Fed was printing a lot of money to push things upward. So you had that. You had the stock market in a dive, or not even a dive is probably the wrong word, but the stock market was going down. In 1974, Nixon resigns, and within a few days, the market hits a bottom and starts moving back up. That was during the Nixon time. Again, like the Johnson time, the impeachment had very little significance in terms of what happened with the market. Now, as a special aside, I don't know, just as a point of interest, Spiro Agnew was Nixon's vice president when Nixon was elected, both times. Agnew had been a very strong law and order candidate. He had been governor of the state of Maryland. He had been a politician in Baltimore. But Agnew had been accepting bribes, extorting contractors, failing to report his taxes, taking kickbacks from contractors, and that continued not just when he was governor, but it continued when he was vice president as well. And so there was an investigation not only going on of Nixon, there was an investigation by the Baltimore officials, prosecutors, by the Maryland Attorney General, that was going on. The U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland. That investigation was going on. They were going to indict Spiro Agnew. But you also had the investigation going on into Richard Nixon. So what was finally negotiated was that Agnew would resign. Agnew would plead guilty to one count of tax evasion and go away, and he would not be indicted. But that allowed Ford to be appointed as vice president and Ford eventually to succeed Nixon. Just as an aside, just to give you a little hint of what could happen in these days. Anyway, the market did not react very much at all. So then we come to the third impeachment, and that was Bill Clinton. That was an impeachment proceeding that was started actually when Clinton was governor of Arkansas, or the incident happened when he was governor of Arkansas. Paula Jones filed a lawsuit in 1994 claiming sexual harassment when Clinton was governor of Arkansas. Clinton tried to delay it, tried to delay so much that it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in 1997 that no, that court case had to proceed, that lawsuit had to proceed, did not protect a president from a lawsuit. But at the same time, in 1997, Linda Tripp was secretly recording conversations with a friend of hers, Monica Lewinsky, who was having a sexual relationship with Clinton. And Clinton began to tamper with the witness, suggesting that Lewinsky file an affidavit that said, no, we didn't do anything. It was witness tampering. And in 1998, Clinton went through a deposition where he denied that he even had a sexual relationship with Paula Jones and with Lewinsky. Clinton was brought up on charges in the House of perjury and obstruction of justice. And that, too, was an impeachment that was voted on and passed out of the House. Bill Clinton was impeached, and it went to the Senate for trial. And in the Senate, the vote came down after the trial, 55 against removal from office and 45 for removal from office. So Clinton survived. So what happened to the markets? During that period of time, the markets had bottomed in 1994. That's at the time when Paula Jones filed her lawsuit. And it was in a correction at that time. But by the time of the impeachment, the market was really beginning to roar back. You remember what was happening in 97, 98. We had the dot-com setup beginning to happen. During that period of time, the market was really storming ahead. And so you had the impeachment take place, and the market dipped a total of 3%. 3%. Think about that in terms of today. An impeachment happens, the market drops 780 points, and then recovers and moves on to new highs. That, again, was the impact of what happened to the market when an impeachment was taking place. That's all. Not bad. So we have three instances in history where we saw an impeachment take place, and the impact of that on the market was a momentary drop for a few weeks, a couple months, and then a complete recovery and moving on. The reason for that is because the markets are independent of what's going on politically in Washington. The markets depend upon businesses and their earnings and their revenues, and those impeachment processes did not have much of an impact on very many businesses, didn't affect profits very much. The markets moved on. We have to look at history as we look at what's going to happen if we have an impeachment, if we have a Senate trial, if we have indictments passed on to the Trump family and the Trump collaborators. All that is going to be a big news item in Washington. But will it really impact the markets? And I don't believe so. I believe there'll be a momentary thing. It'll be bad news. It'll be a lot of publicity. The markets could drop down, just as they did when Cohen was testifying. The market was down 75 points. Can you believe? 75 points. The market at 26,000, the market is down 75 and then moves on to recovery. We're coming to a commercial break. Don't go away, because when we come back, I've got a guest who has a great story to tell. His business is something very special. You want to hear what he has to say? And when we come back, I'll talk more about the markets as well. Don't go away. I'll be right back after this commercial break.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I'm here with Scott Ware of Microcash. We're going to be talking about Microcash. So Scott, welcome to the program.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with your background. Tell us about your background.
Yeah, I grew up in Southern Oregon in Medford, and I went to college at Southern Oregon University for computer science and business. In college, I had a couple startups, and that ended up bringing me to the Seattle area. And I continued those startups and then got into recruiting for engineering around the area for a lot of different companies in town that we know of.
Mm-hmm. And you eventually started Microcash.
Miracash.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Yeah.
Microcash.
That's a good one, too. It might be the next one.
So tell us about Miracash. What do they do?
Miracash is kind of coincides with what the name is. We make a mirrored product. Cache, C-A-C-H-E, is a storage cabinet. So we are making a digital touchscreen mirror that's interactive, voice-enabled services with Alexa, Siri, Google Voice integrated with it. Our customer first being hotels, where we install these cabinetry pieces between the studs of the wall and allows for secure storage for guests' belongings. And the mirror actually acts as a digital concierge, so guests can find restaurants and attractions, order room service, call their car from valet, all the concierge services that the hotel might have.
So when I first heard it described, it was described as a safe in the hotel. Mm-hmm. And you think of a safe as being that thing that's hidden in the closet and you put in a 4-digit code and it opens and closes. This goes way beyond that, right?
Right.
But it also acts as a safe.
Correct. Yeah. Kind of the drive for this was appealing to people, the psychology of the product. The safes that are there now have methods that you can get in pretty easily. You can Google how to crack into a hotel safe. I didn't think that actually was too compelling to want to continue to use one. I had my own experience of an item being taken, a nice watch that I bought myself for Christmas, taken out of the safe. So an incident report was filed, but I didn't feel like that remedied the situation. And for this, our product goes beyond just being a safe, but actually something that's useful, functional, user-friendly, and easy to use, even though it's a technology product, but allows the guests to monitor the contents even when they're out of the room and always know that their belongings are in the safe place that they put it.
So a lot of the theft actually happens with staff that work at the hotels or the cruise ships or whatever. So how do you prevent the staff from breaking into the safe?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the statistic that we're addressing. We provide the hotel management authentication for each of the staff members, whether it be their employee ID as part of the system. But when they go into the rooms, there's an additional monitoring step that relates to the safe. So if there's any reason, which there really shouldn't be any reason, but the staff accesses the safe and opens that door. There's a data log of it. We provide a camera inside the safe, not exterior for privacy reasons, but that actually captures the information of the house cleaner that was in the room and making sure that people are accountable. I think this is something that needed to come out for a while. I've kind of kept track of if anybody else would come out with a product like this, but this kind of ups the level of accountability for staff and management. So
you mentioned a number of times that there's an interactive part to this safe. Mm-hmm. If somebody wants concierge service, for example, mm-hmm. the mirror cache will actually give you concierge service. You want to go to a restaurant, it will do that. How does it do that?
So we have services built in Azure and AWS that allows us to grab content from different locale. So restaurants or concert halls or sporting events that may be taking place. The hotel can have the option to customize what content ends up going on to the mirrors. for the purpose of personalizing the experience for the guests. So different people have different interests. This marries up with the rewards program, so kind of tracks food preferences and allergies as well. But through the mirror, pretty user friendly. You can pull up a list of things in the area. We have Yelp integrated with it as well. Open Table. You can find a restaurant and make a reservation nearby.
So what's the advantage for the hotel or the cruise ship? Mm-hmm. Tell us about the advantage there.
Yeah, so the kind of three-part advantage from just my business experience. The product needs to save money, save time, and make money for the customer. So in the case of the hotel or a cruise ship that we sell to, there's operational efficiencies and staff efficiencies that we're able to offload through the mirror. So we do monitoring of energy consumption. We can turn off the lights if the guest forgets to, turn off the air conditioning and turn down the heat if they forget to. Different room service efficiencies of ordering room service down to the front through the room service department, rather than having to pick up the phone and call down to the front desk for a question, which takes away from the guest experience of any guest that might be there in person. This provides that digital concierge. You can put in a question that you might have and the hotel can respond. Allows for privacy there. Then as a revenue generator for the hotel, if we can drive business to the local community in the area, we provide an opportunity that the hotels get a kickback on that. And really overall, guests or hotels want to provide guests a better experience, and they're always trying to find ways to integrate technology. I kind of liken it to a long time ago. You had your flip phone with a green screen and you could store 250 contacts in it. And you always kind of wished you could make a call, send a text, check your email, listen to music, and take a high definition photo at the same time. So when I kind of came up with this idea, I said, well, what's the end goal? What does this need to do in the end? That somebody needs it to do everything for them. So that's what we've been tackling.
So describe the mirror cache itself physically. How big is it? What does it look like?
Yeah, our first SKU is about 15.5 inches wide. It fits between the studs of the wall, about 5 inches deep, so it fits between room to room, and it's about a 4 foot tall cabinetry piece. The mirror is a little bit larger on the outside, and so when the safe cabinet fits between the studs of the wall there, the mirror and a door system that we've developed works with the locking mechanism and slides open and closed.
So it slides open. It doesn't flip out. It actually slides across.
Yeah, correct.
And is it the entire 4 foot tall door, or is the door just a part of it?
The door and the mirror being part of the same mechanism there. The whole thing slides open and reveals a kind of body length cabinet. We have a couple glass shelves in there that can store your jewelry, your passport, or talking to casinos as well. You can put your poker chips in there. And then towards the bottom, we have a docking station for laptop or devices with charge ports inside.
So you can actually put your phone, you can put your laptop or whatever inside the mirror cache.
Correct. Yeah. Actually, we call the product SAM, Smart Access Mirror.
Smart Access Mirror.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we've talked about hotels. We mentioned cruise ships, but what about individuals and consumers for their home, for example?
Yeah, for the consumer side, it acts as a smart home device. People are used to Google Voice or Alexa being in their home, Ring, Nest, some of these other smart home devices that connects different functions, even Philips Hue for lighting. So our product can integrate with all those technologies. We're coming at it from a play of it being a security device, information security, as well as physical security. We've had some conversations with ADT as well as Honeywell Home, how this can work with those other security platforms.
So how would someone connect with you if they were interested in buying the Marrakesh, either for a hotel, for a cruise ship, or for their home? How would they connect?
Yeah, our website, we always are accepting of anybody that has an inquiry, questions, or curious about, when this comes on the market, which will be later this year. Mirrorcash.com, Mirrorcash spelled Cache.
So spell it all out once again.
Yeah, Mirrorcash, MIRRORCACHE.com.
That's great. It's a great story. I mean, it does everything but to turn down the bed in a hotel, right?
Yeah, maybe our artificial intelligence will get there someday.
It's an incredible story, incredible product. Check it out. And even if you don't need one, just go check it out. Check out the website. And thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We've got more to come in the show. Don't go away. We want to talk about the markets. We want to talk about the Money Show. It's coming to Seattle. And I've got more to say about that right after the commercial break. Don't go away. We've got so much to cover and so little time to cover it in. We'll be right back.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So, once again, let me remind you, the Money Show is coming to Seattle, and I've been asked to do not only one workshop, I'm doing 2 and probably 3. So what is it? As I've said before, it's the leading economist, renowned market strategists, top performing portfolio managers that are going to be here. Steve Forbes of Forbes Magazine will be one here. Ralph Alcampora is going to be here. Bruce Johnstone, the president of Fidelity, will be here. Larry Kudlow, the Council of Economic Advisors for President Trump. Edward Yardeni, who today was on CNBC. Actually, today. I'm a little confused. It was last Thursday, but that's okay. Louis Navalier and Mike Adams. It's free. They expect about 2,000 people. And leading up to Seattle, I did a presentation in Orlando. There were about 4,500 there. That's a money show that's been going for several years, and it was, for me, a very big honor to be in that group of strategists and economists. Phil's gang was also there. If you listen to Phil's gang, they were also at the Money Show. So anyway, June 15th, 16th, do go register. Do come to see me. I'm going to talk about how the secular bull market ends. You've heard it before if you've been listening to the radio, probably. I'm going to be talking about seeking superior returns with lower risk. I'm doing a presentation in the exhibition hall. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to say. And I will be doing the radio show from the Money Show. So anyway, that's coming up June 15th and 16th. Go register. Go plan to be there. Put it on your calendar, June 15th and 16th. So, Standard Chartered Bank. I've talked about this. I think it's worth repeating every 3 months or so. Standard Chartered Bank of the UK, 1,700 branches, 80,000 employees. They did a report back in 2011 talking about super cycles, times in which worldwide growth, worldwide GDP grew at a faster than average rate. The first cycle, recall that it was 1870 to 1913, 43 years it lasted. It was driven primarily by the industrialization of the United States. 1874, we went through a financial crisis that was very much like 2007, 2008. It was a depression kind of time, but there was no bailout. And for 30 years, there was a painful, difficult time. Like 2008, every other year was a recessionary year. Thousands of agriculture farms went under, and there was a lot of pain. 50% of the people were employed on the farms in 1874. That number would decrease significantly. It was the beginning of a shift to make the United States an industrial nation instead of an agricultural. Unemployment probably was around 20%. They didn't record unemployment in those times, but it probably was over 20%, with people moving to the cities and working in the factories. It was a powerful time of industrial growth and a terrible time for agriculture. And it was a time in which the United States emerged as a world leader. London had been the world's financial capital. That was the shift to the United States. That was the first cycle. Second cycle began in 1945, lasted for 35 years until 1970. It was driven primarily by the reconstruction of Europe, by Asian exports. It was driven by the decolonization. The European countries had colonized a number of areas in the world. Those colonies became separate independent states. It was a relatively benign time for business cycles, and there was a growth in wealth countries like the United States and the UK and France and Germany. The stock market went from 150 to over 1,000. Depends upon that whole period of time. The market was in 1941, 100. If you look at 41 to 70, it went from 100 to 1,000. But the real growth was that 1945 to 1970 time. It was a time of the Cold War, a competition between the United States and the Soviet Union over the former colonial nations. That was the second cycle. The worldwide GDP grew at a faster than average rate. Standard Chartered Bank is predicting that a new supercycle began in 2009, and this time it'll be driven by emerging countries, especially Asia. The winners are going to be global. Countries like China, we've seen what China's done, India and Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, Turkey, Sub-Saharan Africa. Big political risk, big instability at times, big volatility. Look at only a few years ago, the Asian country, or the Arab countries, the Arab Spring. Those are going to be repeated any number of times. Countries with less transparency, countries that are less stable, investments are going to be more vulnerable, subject to politicians and bureaucrats. Corruption can be epidemic in some of those countries. But there's going to be a fundamental shift in the balance of power. That's a cycle that they're predicting will last over 20 years. And that is the mile-high view of where I see the markets and the economy and what's going on in this country. People talk about this secular bull market and the bull market coming to an end. Bull markets don't die of old age. This is a secular bull market I think will continue. I believe that Standard Chartered Bank, and I've been talking about this for almost 10 years now, I believe that this is underlying the whole thing. I had a client once who was a plant manager for American Standard. He went to China, Tianjin, China, and in Tianjin, he had a factory of over 1,000 workers. They were making bathtubs, and they were making toilets. Not one of the 1,000 employees there had ever seen a toilet or a bathtub in their entire life. That was the 1980s. Think about that today. Those are the same kind of people that are buying smartphones, that are buying cars, that are drinking lattes. And I talked in the first part of the program about an impeachment, a process that we could see some very difficult political times. But, the reality is that's not going to stop a person in China from buying a smartphone. It's not going to stop a person in Indonesia from buying a car. It's not going to stop a person in the United States from buying clothes. It's not going to stop a person in Italy from going on a vacation. It's not going to stop people around the world from consuming. It's not going to keep people in the United States from going to the doctor if they have a health problem. It's not going to keep them from going to the hospital if they need an operation. The revenues the sales are going to continue to roll on even regardless of what happens in Washington, D.C. And yeah, there will be some industries that are affected. And yeah, there will be some companies that are affected. And yes, there's places to be and places not to be. But in general, even if we go through an impeachment process, even if we go through a trial in the Senate, that's a political thing, and it will have very little impact on the world situation. The world will continue to run. The businesses of the world will continue to run. It's something to think about, to be prepared for, and in the event that things don't work quite as well as I'm talking now, to be prepared for that as well. But it's something not to fear. I've heard some of the pundits talk about the sky is going to fall, the economy is going to go into a sinkhole. I just don't believe that. That's not been historically what's happened. I don't believe that what goes on in Washington will have a significant impact on what happens to world GDP. That's where I'm at. That's where I am going. And that's what I do for my clients. That's where we are. I hope it's good information for you, the listener. And do set aside June 15th, 16th, and come to the Money Show and see me in person. I'll be there. I hope you will be too. Till next week, more about money.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.